You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. We get voicemails, we get messages, we get tweets, we get it all here at Sox in the Basement. It's been a long season, and I think the fan base is angry, and I get it. You're ticked off, you're looking for somebody to lash out at. I got lashed out at just the other day through soxinthebasement.com, where you can leave a message or you can type something, Ed. And Gene wrote, and I'm going to read the entire thing word for word here.
Okay.
Chris, it's addressed to me, not you. He's mad at me.
For a change.
Chris, we all make mistakes. When we make them, we should admit them. You never do. You have said many times, never spend on a bullpen arm. Right, with an exclamation point. Now, I believe this was sent right after the White Sox blew like their 31st lead. Like their bullpen blew their 31st lead
Yes.
of the season. All right? And that's going to happen when you are the worst team in the history of baseball, right? Like when you're 70 games under 500, you're going to have 31 leads given up. I don't know if you spend 50, 60, 70 million dollars on a bullpen, if that's going to change your fate this year. You probably don't lose as many games, but you're probably still a really, really bad team. And that said, it's not my fault, Gene. Like, I'm not the general manager. Chris Getz is the general manager. I'm not the owner of the team. Jerry Reinsdorf's the owner of the team. When I said that, and I will continue to say it, I think the last thing you spend money on is a bullpen. I think this team has far greater problems than their bullpen. This team doesn't have anybody who hits above average, just looking at the OPS stat. They don't have one above average hitter on the entire team. Andrew Vaughn just finally eked above 700, and he's the only one on the roster. I think that's far more important to spend money on. And I use that philosophy when I look at all teams in Major League Baseball. I used to help out Craig Toth, who hosts Bucks in the Basement out of Pittsburgh. And the Pirates have had an up and down year coming out of a rebuild. And in the offseason, I laughed when he told me that they had signed Aroldis Chapman to a $10 million relief pitcher deal when they had obvious holes all over the field. And now Pirates fans are screaming about it. Why do we have this guy on the team? We weren't even able to move him for something. We just wasted that money. We could have used it on a bat. That's why I don't spend on bullpens. I think that the White Sox, if they have a philosophy of let's find as many starting pitcher arms, and some of them aren't good enough to be starting pitchers, they will find a few capable bullpen pieces. That's what Michael Kopech was. And he's valuable enough that the Dodgers have moved him into the closer role. And he was getting better and better leading up to the trade deadline. So I'm not backing off that idea. But there are plenty of things that need to be fixed, my friend, right? Plenty of things. And I want to ask the question today on this episode of Sox in the Basement, brought to you by Cork and Carry at the Park at 33rd and Princeton, in the shadow of the ballpark, with an award-winning menu of ballpark favorites and burgers and the indoor-outdoor seating and the incredible staff, and they are working hard in a very tough year for you. And start supporting the local businesses around the ballpark instead of spending money in the ballpark, folks, because Jerry Reinsdorf's bad for business for everyone. I thought about that the other day rewatching my interview on CBS 2 after Pedro was fired, Ed, and they had on one of the guys from Grandstand, and he was like, this has really hurt business this year. And I had skipped over that the first time I had seen it because I was paying attention to me, but I thought about it. All these people around the ballpark who make their livelihoods on what's going on with this team. Another crime perpetrated by Jerry Reinsdorf, the miser billionaire who has run this franchise into the ground. So when you're out there, if you're still using tickets, if you're going for an event, get over to 33rd and Princeton, support small business. And those folks over there who are working really hard, see more at corkandcarry.com. But what I want to get into today is Chris Getz. I want to take a fresh look from the moment he was hired to now, because I don't need to see what they are for the rest of the year. I know they suck. They're the worst team in baseball history. They're definitely the worst team I've ever seen in any sport ever. They're terrible. How do you evaluate him And what do you think about it? Should he have a job? Is this his fault? Is he saddled with an owner that gave him no chance whatsoever? I'd like to just take a look at what he's done today and try to come up with with a fresh perspective. Take another look at Chris Getz. When I say that to you, what's your first reaction to that?
You have to still wonder what Chris Getz was able to accomplish with the former front office. And we've never gotten a clear answer on that. You and I have supposed and hoped that he was maybe the lone voice of reason in that group, the lone guy that kind of understood it. And what he was saddled with is really kind of any general manager is going to come in and have a hard time because he wasn't given a big payroll. He wasn't given a blank check to go out and say...
he got to reduce payroll.
He got to reduce payroll as a point of fact.
And here's the thing. Since we're going to evaluate it, let's quickly get those numbers in. I want to be as factual as possible on this show. I want to make sure people have a good, solid perspective. Last year, according to Spot Track, and there are so many different places that'll put out salaries. Baseball Reference will put out team payrolls, and you have COTS, and then you have Spot Track, and I tend to lean towards them. They're interesting how they break things down. In 2023, the Chicago White Sox total payroll allocations was $162 million in change, almost 163. It was 162.8. Now, 85 million of that was on the active 26-man roster at the end of the season, I believe, and 37 million of it was injured, and another 38 million of it was retained salary, and there was about $1 million in buried salary. But the total amount of money on the bottom line, what it cost Jerry Reinsdorf to run the team was $162 million and change, 14th in Major League Baseball, which is disgusting because you're in a major market, and you had the Twins sitting 15 right behind you. So you're a joke, Jerry, and the way you spend money is a travesty, and Major League Baseball should take your team away from you. Now, looking at them this year...
But that has nothing to do with Chris Getz yet.
No, not yet.
We're call it $163 million.
This year, that dropped to $134 million. With even buried and retained and salary that's on the injured list and what's on the active roster. $134 million. You reduce salary. You drop to 17th overall. Still neck and neck with the Twins, who dropped down. You got the Mariners are above you. The Padres are above you. There are teams that are in smaller markets. And meanwhile, Minnesota and Kansas City are sitting 18 and 19 right behind you. Your active 26-man roster currently has only $53 million spent on it this year. You spent $36 million on injured players. You had $42 million that was retained, and you buried about $2.3 million. But your total amount of money, bottom line, $134. So Chris Getz was given a team, $28 million less on the bottom line. That's how little Jerry Reinsdorf spent this year. So now when you hear that, is it fair to look at Chris Getz and say, you should have done more?
Well, okay, so there's two ways to build a team, right? Three ways, really. One is you can make trades, but that requires a farm system. Two is use the farm system to bolster your roster and bring up young guys that are going to have an immediate impact. And when I say impact, I don't necessarily mean that they're going to be all-stars immediately. We've been sold that bill of goods before, but that they're going to come up and they're going to contribute. They're going to contribute every day, if not nearly every day, and make a difference in the lineup, meaning that they're going to produce. They are going to be productive at the plate. They're going to be productive in the field, or they're going to be productive on the mound, whatever they are. The third way is you buy a team. You go out and you get veterans and you grab free agents and you sign them to reasonable market deals, or in some cases even overpay a little bit because you're not a destination people want, apparently. And those are the three things. Well, if you're going to drop payroll, $30 million, $28 million, that is, in some ways, that's a star player, one star player. So that's a big impact player. In some ways, that is two very good starting pitchers. Not great, not top of the heap, but like mid-level, solid 2-3 guys in the rotation. Or that could be a number of, bringing it back to Gene's comment at the beginning, that could be some bullpen help. That can be a starting pitcher. That can be another player in the field that's not like a Nicky Lopez or Paul DeYoung reclamation project, okay? So that $28 million does make a big difference in what Chris Getz can do, because if he's looking at, I've got to lose guys off of this to get to Jerry's number, or I can't replace what came off the books, then instead of retooling the team so that they can compete this year, even if it be mediocre this year. Instead, he's got to rely on reclamation projects. He's got to get 5-for-1 trades like he did for Aaron Bummer. He's got to go off the scrap heap. He's got to find the Chris Flexens of the world that are discards that he can sign for amazingly cheap, or he's got to rely on young guys who may or may not be ready, may or may not have enough talent, quite frankly, and see what he's got there and hope that they can contribute, hope that they're ready to go.
And as we dive into this, Sox in the Basement listeners, switch to a new age of life. Keep mom and dad, grandma and grandpa out of assisted living. Make it so they can get around on their own. Live independently. It's all about living independently, getting around with stair lifts, ramps, grab bars, lift chairs, and even bathroom remodeling. Hyatt Home Medical Equipment is the place to go. Hyatt works with insurance. They have 0% financing for qualified individuals, and Hyatt Home Medical Equipment has the latest and greatest in CPAP machines. If you're unhappy with your vendor, switch now, get supplies directly mailed to you, plus you can test it all out. The latest in those CPAP machines in their big, beautiful showroom on the south side of Chicago. See everything that Hyatt Home Medical Equipment has to offer, including continuous glucose monitors at hhme.com. Edward.
Could Chris Getz have done more? Not in the free agent market. Could Chris Getz have done more with the farm system he inherited? Well, let me table that for a second. The answer is no, but let's reroute to that for a moment here. And then the third thing is, could he have done more with trades? I think that's the one area, at least he tried to make an attempt, and he's made several attempts to bring in some outside talent, but it's not been guys that are like, with the exception of maybe Dominic Fletcher, who we looked at as a guy that seemed to be major league ready, that seemed to be primed to take the next step after what he did in Arizona last year. Guys like Corey Julks that were blocked, not good enough to crack the Astros, but maybe good enough if they come here and are given a chance. Or Braden Shoemakes of the world, that's the kind of stuff he's getting. There was a lot of scrap heaping and a lot of clearance shopping that Chris Getz did this year, both in the trade market and in the free agent market. But the biggest problem is the farm system. He inherited a bad farm system, but that was also what he supposedly was helping to build under Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams. So that's where I start to have a problem with, could Chris Getz have done more? Because what I want to know...
You want to know whether or not the farm system's on him. That's the hardest thing to know, because you don't know the inner workings of the team. You don't know how much the guys above him may have gotten in his way. Look, I never understood why he was running the farm system, and I never understood if he was qualified enough to do it. So I can look at that and I say, okay, fine, there might be one of the underlying issues. But let's get back to Chris Getz walking in the door. All right, let's get back to Chris Getz walking in the door, and let's remember Jerry Reinsdorf's full statement, or the main thing that he talked about as to why he hired internally. And he talked about what he owed the fans. Remember this? And he's like, I owe the fans to get better as fast as we can possibly get better. Speed is of the essence. I don't want a long-term proposition. It became clear to me that Getz would be one of the major candidates alongside the other candidates. And then when I started thinking about speed, I owe the fans, I realized that if you bring somebody in from the outside, it's going to take him a year. He's going to have to evaluate everybody in the organization. So you'll lose a year. Well, guess what?
Well, Jerry,
you definitely lost a year, and you may be a few more years behind the way that things went here. So the idea was, if he's internal, he'll identify what's going wrong with these current players. So let's just look at the hitting side of things, right? We knew the defense was a mess. We knew that the pitching staff was not strong enough to be sustained on its own. They were going to either have to bring in talent, or they're going to have to raise up talent on their own. The first thing he does, he brings in Josh Barfield. It seems as though he's got a good idea as how to evaluate talent. And he seems like he's been at least an upgrade in that front office. Bannister is somebody a lot of us seem to believe is developing young pitching. So there was a little bit of an address of the pitching staff with Bannister being brought in. But let's just look at the top 5 hitters, the only 5 hitters in 2023 with an OPS above league average. Your only actual hitters on this team. And it did not include the guy who was 6th, who was hitting below 700 as an OPS at 682 on the year, in Andrew Benintendi, who you're giving $15 million a year to. Luis Robert Jr. had an 857 OPS. Jake Berger had an 806. Eloy Jimenez had a 758. Andrew Vaughn with a 743. And Yohan Moncada with a 730. Well, Jimenez was always injured this year. He did not get 456 at-bats like he had the year before in 120 games, so cross him off. Yohan Moncada, I'm ready to just start calling him a straight-up bum, because this injury shouldn't have lasted so long, and it seems like there's always a setback, and you've got anticipated soreness, and I know he's down there in AAA, but how many games are you really giving him before they have to put him back down on the bench if he even makes it up here to the majors in the last couple of weeks when it really doesn't matter? Goodbye to you. Andrew Vaughn reverted back a little bit to the norm, replacement level. He was slightly above replacement level. He's slightly below replacement level. That's what he is. Jake Berger is moved away by Kenny Williams from all accounts. He gets rid of him to the Marlins. He had a really bad first half for them. He's had some spark in the second half, but he's gone. And Luis Robert Jr. looks like a beaten man and is nowhere near 38 home runs over 546 at-bats with an 857 OPS. Now, that's what you had walking in. And like I said at the beginning of this show, you don't have anybody above league average. You have one guy that's cracked 700, and then you got Moncada, who was over 700 before his injury. Like, that's it. And so Chris Getz didn't have a very good lineup to begin with. The belief of the owner was, we'll just get fresh eyes in here, and we can fix all these problems with some fresh eyes. I'm not going to give him any more money, though. I'm actually going to slash his payroll. And he's supposed to create more hitting, and in the end, ended up with less hitting. You know, I look at that right there in black and white, and I go, well, injuries are a factor, but I think Getz walking in, I don't think he was a big fan of Jimenez because he didn't think he was very reliable. I get the feeling just in how they've dealt with Moncada and talked about him that he was here for 1 year. They were never going to give him $25 million next year. They were going to buy him out, which is what's going to end up happening. I don't think a set of fresh eyes makes Andrew Vaughn any more than what he is. And you know, Luis Robert Jr. was a drop-off. He had a bad season this year. And Jake Berger was already gone. So he had to go out and try to find hitting. I don't know if there was anything out there. If he could have spent money, sure. But what was he going to acquire with a farm system that wasn't that good and no money? And so that's the thing. I don't know how he could have addressed it.
I don't either. And one of the things, getting back to the farm system real quick, that happens here is, if you'll remember, Kenny Williams was a big tools guy. And he was a guy that would focus on, well, this guy can run, this guy's country strong, this guy has, you know, the bat speed. You know, he'd get into the nitty gritty of like what physically was there with the player. And the idea is that development would be, now teach him how to have a good eye at the plate, teach him how to be discerning with his swing, teach him how to make good contact and barrel the ball as opposed to chasing pitches that are reachable but not damageable. Okay, so the Oscar Colas effect to a certain degree, where you can see him hit towering home runs, but then the question becomes, when you actually watch him hit, well, is he making good solid contact, or is he going after pitchers' pitches? Because that seemed to be what he was doing, right? He was struggling because he's not waiting on his pitch, and he's not getting to the point where he can do some real damage. If you can't immediately teach these guys, and I don't care what kind of fresh eyes you bring in, I don't care what hitting coach you bring in, some of these guys just never learn how to hit. And some of these guys, like Andrew Benintendi, there's something there where I don't know why he continues to get worse. And I don't know if it's something where whatever he was with the Red Sox at the start of his career, people started getting into that man's head to tell him he had to be other things, or because he was always kind of in between being a leadoff type hitter and then a middle of the order type guy, that someone's like, well, pick a lane, and he hasn't been able to do it, or what. And Luis Robert Jr., I think, just gave up on this season because it's just such a downer of a year. He just looks like a defeated man. You hit it on the head. But if you can't spend money to bring in guys who know how to hit, he wasn't going to be able to find enough talent in his minor league system to trade away to bring in one or two impact bats that he needed to, or one or two professional bats that he needed to bring in.
Sox in the Basement listeners looking to maximize their money, plan for retirement, give a call to Tom Walsh, your Edward Jones financial advisor. Located on the corner of 111th and Kedzie, but serving the Chicagoland area, Tom has a get-to-know-you approach and a do-the-right-thing attitude. He's been doing this for decades. It's all about knowing your options when you're investing and planning for your retirement. No matter what stage you are at, it costs nothing to check in with Tom. Give Tom Walsh, your Edward Jones financial advisor, a call today, 773-779-0023. Edward Jones, member SIPC. Meanwhile, Chris Getz had a guy who looked like he was going to be a really good hitter for years and years and years, and Luis Robert Jr. was awful this year.
Yeah, he's just not there.
He's been really disappointing, and I'm listening. I mean, I watched John Griffin try to talk about how he's effortless as he's swinging lazily at balls that are going by him while he's standing up at the plate, and Steve Stone has to correct his broadcast partner with basically saying, yeah, but he's not doing very well. He's effortless. What are you talking about?
Well, he is effortless. He's not putting in any effort.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's effortless. I don't see any effort. You know, I got a Luis Robert Jr. jersey, and I'm a fan, and he's done. He's broken. He don't want to be here. He doesn't want to do the job. He's done. I think anybody can look and see that. He isn't even playing anymore. Now, meanwhile, you look at what Getz has done, and let's take a look at what he did with just in the offseason. It's a half-hour show. I want to skip to this because I want to just kind of take a fresh look at what he did when he trades Aaron Bummer. That's his first big move. Trades him on the 16th of November. He trades him for 5 players: Mike Soroka, Jared Schuster, Nicky Lopez, Braden Shoemake, Riley Gowans. Now, I was not a fan of Aaron Bummer. And I'm fine with trading away relief pitchers. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. If you're in the position you're in right now, I don't think having Aaron Bummer in the bullpen was going to make that big of a difference as to how this season was going to go. But you're hoping that you find one good piece out of that trade because you're dealing a relief pitcher. Relief pitchers don't normally bring back really good players because most teams view relief pitchers the way that I view them. With the exception of the elites, they're all a dime a dozen. Don Paul was a relief pitcher in Major League Baseball. He said it on this show before. So I'm going to believe the guy that used to be a Major League pitcher and a relief pitcher about how you can have up seasons and down seasons, and you really are trying to catch lightning in a bottle with a lot of these guys. By the way, John Brebbia has been DFA'd. So I'm reading that as we're sitting here talking.
There is money spent on the bullpen. That was one of his few free agent acquisitions was John Brebbia.
It didn't work out. So that's what happens when you spend money on a bullpen. Mike Soroka, They found a bullpen guy. I wonder if he'll stick around the organization. If he likes the organization and wants to stick around, or if he'll be gone when the season's over. Nicky Lopez is nothing more than a replacement, below replacement level player who can play pretty good defense. That I don't know. I don't know if Aaron Bummer was worth Nicky Lopez. Braden Shoemake wasn't worth it, but they were taking a shot in the dark. I think Jared Schuster comes out of this as probably the best pickup in that thing.
Riley Gowans wasn't terrible in high A this year. He had a 1.038 whip, which is pretty good, but he's struggling at Birmingham, so, don't know what to make out of him yet. If
I think about this trade, I go, took a shot, grab 5 players, you see whether or not something happens. I'm not hanging a grade on it. I'm just kind of going, okay, that's a acceptable first shot as a GM making a trade. He signs Paul DeJong on the 28th of November. And you go, okay, that makes sense. Especially for what they did. They flipped Paul DeJong. That wasn't a bad move when he goes out and he signs him. Then he goes out and he signs Eric Fetty. And that was probably the best deal that he made in the offseason, right? I mean, he goes out and he gets a guy from the KBO. He strikes early in the pitching market on the 13th of December. They were able to flip him for something. Unfortunately, he screwed up that trade and probably didn't get what Fetty was worth.
No, not really.
He overpaid throwing in Kopech and Pham in a 3-team deal to bring back a guy in Vargas who you're hoping the Dodgers were wrong on. Now let that last sentence sink in for a moment. You're hoping, as a member of the White Sox fan base, that the White Sox are better at identifying talent when it comes to Miguel Vargas than the Dodgers. Every time I say it, I want to start giggling because that's
sound
absurd.
Right.
No, right? That doesn't sound right.
It doesn't sound accurate. That doesn't sound like something everybody in Major League Baseball would agree with or not sit there and go, I'm sorry, do you want to rephrase that?
Right. It'd be like getting into a trade situation with the Tampa Bay Rays and thinking you can identify prospects better than they can. right? Every time somebody makes a trade with the Rays and there's prospects being swapped, like, ooh, they're going to regret that in 3 years because they're really good at fleecing teams. Well, I don't know. I look at the Dodgers and I look at them as an organization. They've accomplished things, and they share the same spring training facility, which means the Sox have seen Vargas probably more up close than any other team in Major League Baseball. And the Dodgers have seen what the White Sox have probably more than any other team in Major League Baseball. And I'm supposed to believe the Sox are better at identifying talent than the Dodgers are at this moment. And Miguel Vargas has done nothing to make me stop giggling over that idea. So it was a great move in December to get a piece that you could move that might help you in the season, but that would be valuable for you before the trade deadline, or that you could have even kept until next year. And when you pulled the trigger, you misfired. At least right now, I feel like it's an absolute misfire. I know there's people that just love Vargas and they're like, oh, I looked at his baseball card and I love him as a prospect and everything else like that. I don't know. So what I look at when I overall, because we could sit here, we could pick apart every deal that they've done. I mean, they signed Brebbia in the end of January. But what I look at what they did in the offseason, it looked like a guy who, again, was handcuffed by, you don't have any money. So you've got to go out and make deals to acquire guys with potential that are close to Major League ready, like Dominic Fletcher. You've got to go grab the guy coming out of the KBO and roll the dice on him, which luckily worked out. But then I see a Getz that to this point, when it comes to trades, gives me zero confidence that if he gets into a room with an experienced general manager, that he's going to come out on top, or at least make an even trade, in which he's going to walk away later and say both people won from that deal. And so so far that I think, forget the farm system thing. I know that you're like, well, they had a bad farm system, and true, that could be all on him. It could also be that he was in the room and he was saying, we need to do this and we really shouldn't trade this guy away and maybe this guy should be at a different level, and everything was really controlled by the general manager and Kenny Williams above him. And so and the people that they hired and they kept around and they used for evaluations, it was just so muddled. It was such a mess of a front office. You can't put it all on him, but you can put a little bit of it on him for sure. And it may be a lot more than a little. But more importantly, what makes me afraid with him is he's a general manager who doesn't have any funds to go out and sign big names and must do it through trade, and hasn't given me the confidence that he can actually win a trade.
No, and that's, again, my point about the farm system being twofold. One is that if there's a change in philosophy where Chris Getz wants players who actually have a ability to play the game, maybe not all the tools, but the ability to play the game, versus focusing on tools, where he's going to at least balance that out a little bit more, that's going to take us years to find out. We will never have that answer, in the next 2 or 3 years. It's going to take a long time. But does he have the ammunition to go out and make a trade where he can overpay to definitely win a trade and get a guy that's established? Or does he have to try and throw darts? And does he have to try and be perfect with every trade, which is a scary thing for any GM, but especially a GM that's new to the game here. And when I'm not talking about baseball, I'm talking about new to the game of being a general manager, new to the game of sitting at a table and negotiating a trade, where he has to be 100% sure that what he's seeing in the player that he's getting back, what he's seeing in Miguel Vargas has got to be accurate to the nth degree. There can't be a margin for error for him, because he can't make up for it. Okay. If he has to go and make up for that trade right now in the offseason, there's not much there that he can do, that he can use. He had to be perfect with the Dylan Cease trade. Okay. Not sure that he was perfect with it.
That may be the one. That may be the only one that I'm feeling good about, because I think Drew Thorpe's going to be good. I do. I think Drew Thorpe's going to be good. I know some people, they look at the bad things or they look at the speed on the fastball. I think that he fits what Bannister wants to do. I think that trade was influenced by the fact that Bannister saw somebody he really liked. And remember, you went after a prospect that was involved in the Soto deal, which means you're not the only person who identified that prospect as a high-level talent. So there were other eyes that felt the same thing that you felt in trading away Dylan Cease. And if you felt that you must trade Cease, which again goes back to we're constantly dealing guys with multiple years that are still left, and you just wish that they would invest a little bit of money and try to leave. But if you had to do it, that may be the one trade right now that I'm holding out hope was a good Chris Getz trade.
Yeah, but again, his level of perfection has got to be 100%. I mean, there's no, until he can, if he's given enough time, until he can, if he is capable of doing this, if this is within his realm and his front office's realm of possibilities, until he can get a farm system going that can consistently produce the way, say, Tampa Bay's does. You reference their farm system where they always seem to have spare prospects that are interesting to other teams, but the ones that they let go, you kind of sitting there going, yeah, but why are you letting that guy go? I understand you have this guy, but yeah. Until he can become one of those general managers who just has guys of interest to all the other teams in baseball, where they're willing to sit there and say, yeah, I'll take a chance on that guy and get rid of this guy. And I'll even retain some salary to get that guy so that you don't have to pay as much. Until he's got that kind of leverage at the table, his scouting has got to be right on because he has only so many shots. This is a man with very few chips. When he goes to free agency, he can barely meet the buy-in to sit at the table. When he goes into the trade negotiations, he can barely meet the buy-in to sit at the trade table. And I don't know that you can fairly evaluate any general manager for the Chicago White Sox unless he comes in and just absolutely is dead nuts perfect. But also, if they don't compete next year, because that was also what was told to us, it's going to be a major disappointment, and that is on Chris Getz.
Well, here's the thing. I look at Chris Getz as a replacement-level general manager. Like that's what I've gotten to just having this conversation. That's the word that keeps coming into my head. He's the Andrew Vaughn of the front office, right? Like he's like a guy who is part of the team. You know, he's got close team roots, like how Vaughn was drafted by the team, and then he was elevated probably a little bit too quickly internally, and he's in there, and like you hope he's going to do good, but like this might be all he is. And, I think that as we get through the last month here of this season, another discussion that we'll have, maybe even on the next show, but very soon, is what would you do? Knowing that your owner is going to not increase your payroll. He's slashing season ticket holder prices by 10%. I don't think he's increasing the payroll while decreasing his income. So he may even see a decrease in his payroll. And the discussion has to be now, well, what do you expect him to do? I feel like that's, you can yell, you can throw barbs, you can get angry at a guy. I will continue to say this is not the guy that I would have brought in to run this team. I'm not yet convinced he's bad at it. I'm definitely not convinced he's good at it. He's the Andrew Vaughn of the front office.
Have you ever seen the two of them together? Are we sure Andrew Vaughn is not just Chris Getz in an Andrew Vaughn mask?
You could not hide Andrew Vaughn's face underneath a Chris Getz mask. But Chris Getz could be underneath an Andrew Vaughn face.
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
Much bigger face. Definitely.
That's what I'm thinking.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.